Hello again. Harold Wilson famously observed that a week was a long time in politics. I want to look back a little longer than a week, namely to 2016, when Boris Johnson was campaigning for Britain to leave the European Union. One of his major concerns at that time was mass immigration. I have here an excellent book which is a collection of some of the greatest political speeches since 1900. I might quote one or two in future videos, but extraordinarily, Boris Johnson has found his way into this book of famous speeches, although I'm bound to say that I don't find any of his speeches particularly inspiring, certainly not in the same league as, say, Martin Luther King or Roosevelt. Churchill, but still. I want to quote from a speech which Boris Johnson made in London on May the 9th, 2016, when he was explaining why he wanted Britain to vote leave in the forthcoming referendum. Ready? It is deeply corrosive of popular trust in democracy that every year UK politicians tell the public that they can cut immigration to the tens of thousands and then find that they miss their targets by hundreds of thousands, so that we add a population the size of Newcastle every year with all the extra and unfunded pressure that puts on the NHS and other public services. There now, I'm sure that most people watching this could not agree more with those sentiments. It is exactly why so many people think. And it is why the country voted to leave Europe. And it also explains how Johnson managed to get himself voted to power in 2019. It was on a platform of explicit opposition to mass immigration for all the familiar reasons that it would put pressure on the National Health Service and other public services. Something very strange, though, appears to have happened to Boris Johnson in the 6 years since he made that speech. He talks about adding the population of Newcastle each year to this country through immigration in that speech. That is to say, a little over 300,000 people. In the last year, though, over 1 million immigrants arrived in this country, which is more like the population of Birmingham, never mind Newcastle. What has caused this change in the Prime Minister's views on immigration? Not that he has said that his views have changed, of course. It's only by looking at what he said a few years ago and what he is actually doing now that we are able to see that something is different. There are only a limited number of possible explanations, and I honestly do not know which is the most likely. One hypothesis is that economic circumstances which ordinary people cannot understand because they are so complex make it vital for the nation's well-being that we import hundreds of thousands of new workers each year. I'm not an economist and I have only the haziest grasp of the subject, and so this is quite possibly true. After all, Japan has now started allowing more foreign workers into their country, and at the last count had about 1.5 million, maybe 3 or 4% of the workforce. If this is the correct explanation, then I cannot see why we are not told this in an open way and the matter set out for debate. Then we would be able to make an informed choice at the next election. What actually happened, though, is that Boris Johnson stood in the last election on a platform committed to stop hundreds of thousands of immigrants arriving here, and now 3 years later, the numbers have tripled. Another explanation would be the favoured one of some of those who comment here, which is that such large-scale immigration is part of a plan by a global organisation which transcends national boundaries and frustrates the wishes of elected governments. By this reading of the situation, Boris Johnson is little more than a helpless puppet dancing to the tune of bankers and so on. This is an appealing idea, and I've looked into it in great detail over the years, but the evidence for it isn't really that strong, and I'm far from convinced by it. Then there is the possibility that Johnson never really cared about immigration in the first place because he's rich, was not born in this country, and has a cosmopolitan background. In other words, he never intended for a moment to bring down immigration because it is so useful for him and other wealthy people. This would mean that when he made that speech which I just quoted, he didn't mean a word of it, and he was just playing to the gallery and hoping that it would lay the way for his path to number 10 Downing Street a few years later, which of course it did. On balance, this is the possibility which seems to me to be most likely. After all, we know that the Prime Minister is a pathological liar, and that despite his cuddly exterior, he is utterly ruthless in pursuit of his own personal interests. He's demonstrated that in both his personal life and also his political career. He cares for nothing and nobody other than his own interests. Why would he care about immigration? He and his family are not likely to end up living on a council estate in Wolverhampton or Lewisham, are they? For want of any further evidence, I think this seems to me the neatest scenario which covers all the known facts, and applying Occam's razor, which suggests that we should always choose the simplest hypothesis which covers everything, I think that's probably the explanation I'm going to go for.